Booked by Michael Moss. Michael Moss started with a history of big tobacco and gave us a background of how they created their business model, which was to create a narrative about the product. The narrative in this case was that nicotine and tobacco provided a benefit to health, relaxation, weight management, and many other things. Then they used that narrative over and over in marketing and with constant repetition. And then when the science began to emerge that cigarettes were in fact addicting and created disease, they used cherry-picked data that their scientists produced to deny. They continued to deny that cigarettes were addicting all the way until 2021, when a CEO of Big Tobacco finally admitted that cigarettes were in fact addicting. I believe he gives us this background in the beginning of the book to create this comparison with the processed food industry, because Big Tobacco actually divested, or they were sued and bankrupted and moved into Big Food. So they used that same business model. Now they are out of the big food industry since 2018, but the other companies have used the same model because it was so effective. Michael Moss then goes into a connection between food and addiction.
I like good food.
The research was not available to discover this prior to around the 1970s, when early models of PET scans became available, and these could image the soft tissue of the brain live in action. So that's when the research at reputable academic institutions began in Yale and Brookhaven National Lab. One study would image the participants in a PET scan while they were shown a famous logo. For example, the logo for Coca-Cola was the most famous logo in the world before Apple. Flash the image of the logo, and they determined that a certain part of the brain lights up. Then through a straw, they provided a shake. So they would drip the shake on the tongue of the participant, and a different part of the brain lit up. This is important information. Michael Moss had this tried on him, and any time I've ever seen him anywhere, he looks thin. I don't know if he had a history of being overweight, but it doesn't sound like it from this, because when he was shown the image of a shake, he had no reaction in his brain. It did not light up. Then the other part of his brain that gets pleasure, that did light up. People used to think that they were overweight because they enjoyed food. It's actually the opposite. They're overweight because the part of the brain that drives them to get food, that other part of the brain, that lights up more in some people than in other people. Roy Weiss, a behavioral psychologist, discovered the combination of sugar, fat, and salt would trigger the brain to produce and release chemicals that would create the addictive response. Sugar receptors are on the tongue. Fat receptor nerves are on the roof of the mouth. If you eat both at the same time, different pathways to the brain are stimulated simultaneously. Fat and sugar are rarely found together in nature. For example, breast milk has 3.5% fat and 7% sugar, whereas a manufactured snack has 24% fat and 57% sugar. It's not the drugs we take that cause addiction, but how the drugs tap into our biology and boost the addictive chemical release. The brain produces dopamine, not in response to the pleasure we get, but in response to the pleasure we expect to get. The manufactured food industry exploits our biological drives. There are regions in the brain responsible for the go response. The stop response is more difficult to map, possibly because the stop response is found in the gut. The surge in dopamine from the go response gives the brain an advantage over the stop response. Speed and addiction. How fast a substance reaches the brain will determine how addictive it is. For example, cocaine, if you snort it, will reach the brain within 5 to 10 minutes. If you smoke it, it will reach the brain in 10 seconds. Nicotine reaches the brain in 10 seconds, and sugar reaches the brain in 0.6 of 1 second, about half a second.